In a recent video, I quoted a source that said Americans spend a full 1/4 of their waking lives either driving or working the hours they need just to be able to afford a car. Well, I'm not good at taking things at face value, so today I'm going to investigate that claim, and what I found was more disturbing than I expected. So today we're going to talk about the cities where car dependency steals the most hours of your life, and the ones that do the opposite, and both lists are super interesting. So how much of your life does your car cost you? Well, we're going to investigate that question every which way, and it's all coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics always welcome, but this is just another one of these topics that once I started thinking about it just gnawed at me. And it was this Ivan Illich quote that I came across when I was putting together my video on the paper Car Harm. The typical American male devotes more than 1,600 hours a year to his car. He spends 4 of his 16 waking hours on the road or gathering his resources for it. Now, it is a little weird that the quote references males exclusively, but I'm going to chalk it up to the fact that this comes from a book that was published 50 years ago. Anyway, I became kinda obsessed with this idea. It's one of those things that sounds like it could be an understatement or an overstatement, and 50 years have passed, so it seems like someone somewhere should be analyzing some data to see whether it actually holds true in 2024. So it should go without saying that that person is me, but also this one's just personal. As someone who doesn't own a car, I spend precisely 0% of my waking life driving one or quote-unquote gathering resources to pay for one. Sure, my day in, day out existence has travel time in it, but I mostly bike places, and for the most part, that's time I literally don't have to spend at the gym. I went to the doctor last week. Just normal stuff, don't freak out. And when I told her I don't have a car and I just bike and walk everywhere, she had no further questions about my exercise habits. Okay, so let's talk about the analysis piece of this. And to do this, I'm gonna walk through how I crunch the numbers on a national level, which will give you some context for everything else in this video. I used the Census API to grab results from the American Community Survey subject tables S0801, commuting characteristics, and S2001, earnings in the past 12 months for every city available, which is mostly the 500-ish cities over 75,000 population or so. The variables I'm using are percent who drove alone and mean travel time to work from S0801, and median earnings for full-time year-round workers from S2001. So there really are two components. One, how much of your time do you spend driving every day? And I took what I think is a conservative approach to this. I multiplied the mean travel time to work by the percent who drove alone to get the average drive time for a worker, so I'm cutting carpooling people a break. I doubled that number to get the total time to and from work, and then I multiplied that number by 3 since the most recent National Household Travel Survey says that only 30% of vehicle miles traveled is commute related. The second part is, how much of the income from a full-time job do you need to pay for a car? So the Bureau of Transportation Statistics pegs the average annual cost of car ownership in the US in 2023 at $12,182, of which they're saying $8,318 is fixed costs and $3,864 is variable costs like fuel and maintenance. They actually include depreciation in fixed costs, which I honestly don't agree with. Your car depreciates faster if you drive it more, although it is non-linear. But this is the government, so I'm not gonna question it. So what you're gonna see when we go city by city is, I will scale the variable cost component up or down, depending on whether the city in question has more or less average driving, and by how much. So for the national number, I've got an hour 49 a day spent driving, and 21% of your 40-hour work week going to pay for car ownership. So spread over 7 days, that's an average of 73 minutes a day for a grand total of 3 hours, 2 minutes a day either driving or working in the service of being able to drive. Not quite the 4 hours a day I'd been led to believe, but still a solid 19% of your waking life if we assume 8 hours of sleep a night. And keep in mind, I did take a somewhat conservative approach. And yeah, males do drive more than females, so there's that, but they also make more money. I guess we still haven't fixed that yet. Okay, and for this list, I'm just gonna highlight one city in each metro area. Otherwise, this video would just be, I'll talk about it later in the video, so let's get into it. Number 10, Cape Coral, Florida, which I'm not sure I've ever talked about on this channel, which is an absolute disgrace since it's so photogenic. I mean, probably the pinnacle of an inefficient transportation environment. Mean commute time to work is about half an hour, and incomes aren't as high as you might think. So you need the income from about a quarter of your working hours to pay for the privilege of doing all that driving. Number 9, let's go to the US's most confusing metropolitan area, Hampton Roads, Virginia. This is Suffolk, another city never discussed in the history of this channel. You guys, there's going to be so much novelty in this video. Hard to characterize Suffolk. I feel like it's one of those excerpts that really has the feel of being its own independent city, but has been swallowed up by a larger adjacent metro area over time. Over 80% of commuters here drive alone to work, with an average one-way commute time of 31 minutes. Over a full 7-day week, this is 3 hours and 47 minutes a day that the average person is either driving or working to pay for their car, which is getting perilously close to 25% of waking life territory. Number 8, let's visit Chicagoland, and I mean greater Chicagoland because we're going to Joliet. Never discussed in the history of this channel, similar geographic context to Suffolk, Virginia, Joliet is another city that's been subsumed into a much larger conurbation. Similar numbers to Suffolk too, just incomes are a bit lower, so you need to work more hours to pay for your car. And this is something you'll notice about this list. These are mostly cities located on the distant periphery of a metro area where you have to drive longer distances, and these aren't going to be higher income suburbs or exurbs, because in cities with higher median incomes, it simply isn't going to take as many hours to pay for your car. Number 7, a bit different. It's Garland, Texas, just outside of Dallas. So it's an inner ring suburb and not on the periphery, and it does have the vestiges of an original town, but a modern built form that's much more recognizably suburban. I don't know what else to say, but all of Texas's major metro areas are really designed for driving. Just Garland alone has access to 3 different freeways, a wide selection of amazingly scenic 7-lane arterials. It would just be a very tough place to live car light or car free. Number 6, let's go to South Florida, and the culprit here is Deerfield Beach, north of Fort Lauderdale. By the way, there's a whole cluster of cities in the Miami metro area that score worse than number 7 Garland. Miramar, Miami Gardens, and Hialeah all have terrible bottom line numbers, but what puts Deerfield Beach over the top is about 33 minutes of driving to work one way. These South Florida cities are always so interesting and possibly maddening geographically. The quote-unquote beach part of Deerfield Beach only consists of about a mile of coastline. The vast majority of the actual water frontage is inland. Keep in mind, I'm just talking about the time cost of driving here. If you're interested in knowing how South Florida pencils out on transportation plus housing, or what we call location efficiency, I have videos for that. Number 5, Stockton, California, feels like a very different dynamic from the other cities on this list. It has a very super commuting vibe to it. Long drive times, relatively high drive-alone mode share, pretty modest incomes for California. 3 hours and 53 minutes a day devoted to either driving or making enough money to be able to afford to drive. Which gets to what's really the whole philosophical question at the heart of this video. Does your car exist to serve you, or is it really the other way around? Earthlings, rise up while there's still time. Number 4, a census-designated place I wasn't even aware of, and I actually lived in the Vegas Valley for a year. It's Sunrise Manor, Nevada. The lowest median full-time worker income of any city on this list, but still tons of driving, which is just an absolutely crushing combination. Interesting because there is a lot of employment. Nellis Air Force Base is right here, and several of the quality gaming establishments on the Boulder Strip. But you know, Vegas is the newest, most modern, fastest growing US metro area of the last few decades, so a built environment like this, I don't know what else you can say, but that it is the state of the art. Given everything we've learned as a nation, this truly is what we've collectively decided is the best way to build urban environments. A+ work. Sorry, but in case you haven't noticed, I have a love-hate relationship with videos like this. I love to research and produce them. The stuff I discover along the way is fascinating, but man, do they put me in a mood. Because I sort of joked about it already, but there really is a philosophical question at the heart of this, which is not owning a car freeing or is it imprisoning? When I ask this question, it's actually pretty divisive. There are people who agree with me on 99% of everything who will say, yes, not owning a car is absolutely limiting. Your mobility is restricted, full stop. But then I look at the fact that the decision to organize your life around car travel costs you up to 25% of your waking life, and sometimes more, as we'll see in a minute. And I have to ask, who is it that's really being limited? There is a lot of nuance to this, but I just think it's worth pondering. So I've still got the bottom 3, and I'm actually going to give you the 10 cities where you spend the least amount of time driving or paying for the privilege. And I'm going to do it in rapid fire fashion. And usual reminder to click on all the things and connect on all the apps. Let's hit one dishonorable mention. I didn't include Puerto Rico in this because the disparity in median incomes between Puerto Rico and any of the 50 states is just massive, and that factor alone would throw everything way off. But Bayamon, outside of San Juan, very car dependent unless you live near the Train-Urbano line. And the math says adult full-time workers spend about 300 minutes a day either driving or working to be able to afford to. Absolutely shameful, and I really need to get to Puerto Rico to make videos. Just for contrast, let's speedrun the 10 cities where people spend the least proportion of time dealing with cars. 10, Mountain View, California, very high median incomes and relatively little driving for a US suburb. 9, Seattle, only 37% of people drive alone to work. 8, across Lake Washington, Bellevue, only an hour and a half a day on driving or paying for it. 7, Washington, D.C., relatively high incomes and only 27% of people drive alone to work. 6, Palo Alto. You know, I told you about some of these Silicon Valley cities in my Most Improved Suburbs video. Check it out if you haven't already. 5, San Francisco. High median incomes, not much driving, and it almost seems too obvious to point out, but cities where you have the freedom to spend more of your waking life on something other than your car are not cheap places to live. Would land value tax solve this? Many people are saying. 4, Boulder, Colorado. Not that many people drive alone, and the average commute duration of 18 minutes is the lowest on this list. 3, Redmond, Washington, mentioned in my recent video on reverse commuting. It really helps a lot when you have an affluent city that's actually home to a huge employer with a highly paid workforce. Who knew? 2, Berkeley, California. Only 25% of people drive alone and incomes are high. And number 1, Cambridge, Massachusetts, a city that absolutely deserves its own video. Only 22% of full-time workers drive alone, and the average person spends just over an hour a day on car ownership. I have to address New York. It comes in at number 23 out of the 500 odd qualifying cities. And super interesting, median personal income significantly lower than, say, DC, the Bay Area, or Seattle. 22% of people drive alone, which is higher than you might think. Remember, this is all of New York City. When they do drive, it's over 40 minutes one way to their jobs. You know, it'd be so cool if there's a solution to the problem of people wasting so much of their lives sitting in traffic. Okay, back to the list, and ironically, after the Bay Area placing 4 cities in the honorable mentions, I have to give you Antioch out at the end of the BART yellow line. So I don't know that I'd call it an exurb, but 66% of people drive alone, and the average commute is over 40 minutes. Median income for an individual working full-time is okay, but this all just ends up being a lot. 242 minutes a day in the service of your car, so now we're officially in 25% of waking life territory. Dishonorable mention, Pittsburgh, right next door and also on the BART yellow line. Just slightly less bad. Number 2, a very weird one, it's Waldorf, Maryland, outside of DC, and no other DC suburb or exurb shows up anywhere near the list. 71% of commuters drive alone, and the average one-way commute is about 44 minutes. Median incomes are okay, but man, all that driving eats up a lot of your wages. And FYI, it is really easy to just grab loads of census data and wrangle it in your analysis tool of choice. So I did all US counties, and Charles County, Maryland, where Waldorf is located, is the worst rated county in the entire US, and actually worse than Waldorf itself. Food for thought and maybe fodder for a future video. And number one, now you're going to understand why I did this by metro area, because the top 5 non-Puerto Rican cities on this list, and 11 of the top 12, are all in the greater LA/Inland Empire area. If you watched my Long Beach video from a couple weeks back, I joked that living in SoCal means not only spending a quarter of your non-sleeping life either driving or working to pay for the privilege of driving all over what should be the most beautiful land in our fair nation, but spending an additional quarter of your life making small talk with people about how much driving sucks. Well, these are all cities where you spend darn close to 30% of your waking life dealing with your car. Palmdale, where the average one-way commute is over 45 minutes, isn't even the worst one. That honor is reserved for Paris in Riverside County. So yes, the Inland Empire strikes again. Lots of driving, long commutes, very modest incomes. All told, 4 hours and 36 minutes of your waking life every day devoted to the privilege of driving ungodly amounts. Oh well, at least the housing is super affordable. Man, someone has got to get these people some better commuting options like a train, or maybe it's time to start going with hot air balloons. Not only are hot air balloons cool, it turns out they're extremely useful under the right circumstances. And on that note, I have a very strong content recommendation. It's The Balloon Escape from the channel Neo, and is the story of Peter and Günther, 2 men living in East Germany in 1979 who hatch a pretty audacious plot to escape to West Germany with their families. I won't give you the whole plot, obviously, but the basic setup is they get a hold of a Western magazine that has an article about the Albuquerque Balloon Festival, which is a highly recommended event, by the way, and they decide to just, build a hot air balloon. Seems like a solid plan, and guess what? Turns out that such were economic conditions in East Germany that you could trade cases of beer for hot air balloon materials, and they were off and running. The video gets into all kinds of interesting stuff, like how you actually construct a hot air balloon just from what you saw in photos in a magazine, the level of desperation to escape East Germany that's required to even undertake something like this at all. It's got interviews with one of the actual perpetrators, and the story of how all this plays out, the incredible number of technical challenges they faced, not just building a hot air balloon sufficient to carry 2 families, but figuring out how to control it once airborne, and how it all turned out in the end. Well, I won't spoil it, but the whole thing is pretty mind-blowing, and the video is incredibly well done. The Balloon Escape from Neo's Underexposure series, which covers stories from history that are criminally underexposed, is a Nebula original and exclusive to the platform, and it's a fantastic example of how Nebula supports creators in tackling ambitious ideas and bringing them to life with, in the case of The Balloon Escape, research, historical footage, and incredibly well done recreations of key moments in the story. Being part of the Nebula community, learning from these kinds of creators, and being able to access support for my own production process has been incredibly important for the growth of my channel, and I am so proud to be a Nebula creator. Nebula, after all, is a streaming service that's owned by all of us on the platform, so when you sign up, you're helping us grow a service that, by its very nature, supports all of us in a long-term structural way, financially, professionally, and creatively. So if you want to support this channel's ability to continue to improve and to grow and continue to reach more people, signing up for Nebula is a great way to do that. And Nebula continues to invest in making the streaming experience better, including a new look and layout that makes it easier not only to find what you're looking for, but discover new content and new creators that you're really going to enjoy. This includes categories that function as their own kind of mini services, like news, which is run by the great team at TLDR News to ensure the journalistic and editorial integrity of what you're seeing on the platform. Pretty important these days. Also, this year, my videos are going up early on Nebula, a full week early in most cases, so if you want to move your viewing schedule up and avoid spoilers, a Nebula membership is a pretty cost-effective way to do that. Because if you use my custom link down the description, you really do get an amazing value. All the Nebula content for just $2.50 a month, which is 40% off the usual price, and the lifetime offer is still available. $300, you pay once, and you get Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exist. As always, whether that's a good deal or not is a personal decision between you and your preferred actuarial table. No matter which way you go, though, a Nebula membership is a fantastic way to demonstrate your support for a creator-owned platform, and this channel in particular, and fund the continued production of amazing originals like the Balloon Escape. And Nebula has recently announced a slate of cool new originals that I'm really looking forward to. And for all of you who are already Nebula members, just a massive thanks from me, although I feel obligated to say that you should probably be watching this video on Nebula, where it appears ad-free and without this Nebula promo in it. I totally respect your choice, though. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support, which frees me up to just do whatever it is I feel like doing every week. Within reason, of course. I'm not a crazy person. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then. And thanks for watching on Nebula.